I want to go back to Egypt just a minute, if we may, and then I have one quick question on Tunisia. I'd like to come back to that. But first, let's talk about Egypt. I'm concerned, Secretary Kerry just in August had a dialogue over there and is encouraging Congress to sort of turn a blind eye to some of the social concerns and governmental concern or governance concerns to continue to support them from a security cooperation perspective. Do you think we're finding the right balance between encouraging them, LCC particularly, in the direction of good governance at the same time that we obviously are still supporting them from a security cooperation perspective? Would you respond to that, Mr. Malka?
I heard Mr. Malka, so...
oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I thought you were telling him go ahead.
I'll take the first stab, and then I'll... The short answer is no. I think when it comes to these sort of authoritarian leaders, we've been hearing from civil society in the region for decades, and we know what you do. What you do is you signal your displeasure in public and private ways, in ways that make things better. As I mentioned, there are 177 parliamentarians we could get released from jail. There are hundreds with death penalties for crimes being committed we could help get out. Just as the beginning of the 40,000 Egyptians that have been jailed.
So what you're saying then is we're really sending conflicting messages, is that right?
Yeah, we're sending conflicting messages, and it's not only demoralizing Egyptians, the 90% that didn't show up to vote, it's demoralizing the whole region. Like, what are you doing?
So are you concerned that El-Sisi turns to Moscow recently as a function of this, or is this related?
Absolutely. I mean, he turned to Moscow in part because he thought he could get support without strings, and this is a real problem. And so you used the word balance. Balance is the right word. I was the co-chair of the U.S.-Egypt Science and Technology Fund for 4 years. And it was part of that $250 million, I don't know what it's at right now, assistance that we benefit more from that program, or as much as the Egyptians do, right? A lot of our arms manufacturers, right, our agriculture, you know, it's not that the Egyptian assistance, that's why there's a big lobby for it. It's not just that people love Sisi, right? This Egyptian assistance that goes back to Camp David benefits the U.S. in a number of ways: business community, science community, agriculture, military.
And peace in the region with their relationship with Israel the last decade or so.
And so I'm all for full engagement with Egypt. It's more about signaling. Right? Are you signaling that you're concerned? Are you helping getting some people out of jail? We recently spent a lot of political capital getting Mohammed Sultan out of jail. Mohammed Sultan is now outspoken, and the Egyptians may be regretting letting him out. But that sends an important message to everybody, to Islamists, moderate Islamists, radical Islamists, non-Islamists, secular opposition in Egypt, the 15,000 that have been arrested that aren't Islamists in Egypt, you know, that we care about more than just geopolitical stability, and that we would and that we understand that long-term geopolitical stability depends in part on democratization of these societies and opening up on human rights.
And also that the economy is moving. Right now, Egypt's economy is not.
All the indicators are terrible on the Egyptian economy, and there's so many checks the Gulf countries are going to be able to
So you
write.
create a disenfranchised, particularly young people coming to the workforce early in their career.
Yeah.
They're disenfranchised. You've mentioned that in Tunisia. And the depression you're talking about, the suicide rates and so forth.
Just as bad in Egypt.
Just as bad in Egypt, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Haim, do you want to add something? Yeah.
It's difficult to strike the right balance between our military cooperation and support for human rights. I mean, Sisi is playing a different game. The Gulf states are playing a different game. The Russians are playing a different game. And the Egyptians know that they have alternatives. When we were debating here, and it's an important debate, whether there was a military coup in July of 2013, when we were debating that, the Gulf countries were writing checks for billions of dollars, saying, okay, if you're going to cut aid, if you're going to hold up the transfer of weapons, no problem. We have other alternatives. And that weakens the American hand, because Egypt is important for lots of things, for the overflight rights, for the preferential treatment in the Suez Canal, for Arab-Israeli peace, for its center of gravity, not only in the Levant, but also in North Africa as well. And that's important. And those serve a lot of global American interests. So trying to promote human rights and trying to get President Sisi to do what he clearly doesn't want to do when we have not a lot of leverage is difficult. What I think we need to be focusing on in Egypt and in other countries as well is less about talking about democracy and more about tolerance and inclusion and rethinking this tolerance that many countries like Egypt, which used to be very cosmopolitan, multi-ethnic, multi-religious societies, once upheld. We need to promote this inclusivity and this tolerance in Egypt.
When you've got Tunisia, I'd like to go back that in the time remaining that, you know, after the overthrow of President Ben Ali, something like 20%, as I've seen estimates as high as 20% of the mosques there were dominated by radical imams, and so that throws another source of imbalance in Tunisia, which so far has been a model in terms of what we can hope for in these countries in that area. Are we doing what we should be doing in Tunisia to support the balance toward tolerance, as you say, and inclusion? I mean, I like those two words. I mean, are we, as a country with a very dominant foreign policy position in the region, are we doing what we should be to encourage Tunisia in the same vein?
Well, I think...
And to help them, not just encourage them, but to help them.
Sure. There have been positive examples of how the United States has played a positive role urging political consensus and compromise in Tunisia. And I think the former Tunisian ambassador played a critical role at different points in Tunisia's crises in 2013 and 2015, and continuously urged the parties to come together despite their differences. And that made a difference. And that's why it's so important that we are fully engaged, that we do have larger diplomatic staffs in the region, because U.S. engagement and diplomacy matters at critical junctures. And when we're not active, when we're on the sidelines, other countries with different interests will come in and promote narrow agendas that oftentimes promote conflict and sustain conflict rather than political unity that's so important for these countries to try to get beyond many of the problems that they face.
Let me add that in Tunisia, they lost control of many of their mosques. I know Tunisians that just stopped going because there was nothing there for them that they could tolerate. On both sides of this coin, either government-baked sermons that were just impossible to listen to, scratching on the, or all the way to this, what is this Salafist saying? It doesn't represent my version of Islam. Tunisian government's doing better at getting control of that, but the problem is that the government has been more focused on closing mosques and getting rid of certain imams than it has been on actually addressing the issue of what kind of Islam we want to have in Tunisia. And in terms of the other side of the inclusivity piece, the Islamists have been included in Tunisia, and it's an example for the region, model for the region. But the inclusivity question in Tunisia right now has more to do with economics and security. So how do we include old regime elements, this is the economic reconciliation piece, without forgiving all of the sins that can't all be forgiven? And how do we reform the security forces without sweeping everything under the rug? Algeria did that. Algeria had no transitional justice after their wonderful reconciliation ending the war, and a lot of Algeria's current problems is because they never did that. Tunisia has an opportunity to actually reform the security forces and actually reform the economy in ways that address constructively and proactively with the former regime elements that want to be a part of things, but some of them want to be a part of it with no cost and with no historical rendering. Let me just say one more thing on Egypt that I think the catchphrase is holistic. You can do counterterrorism, as Chaim said, but you have to do it in a holistic manner that addresses economics, which Sisi is talking about before his trip to the UK, and politics, which he's not talking about at all. The long-term social contract in all these countries always was, before the revolutions, benefit economically from whatever we're doing, leave the politics to us. Mm-hmm. The Arab Spring turned that upside down and said, no, actually, politics is a function of economics, economics is a function of politics, and we need to do both politics and economics. Sisi's trying to go back to the old system where it's a security argument, I'm going to help you benefit economically, but leave the politics to me.
When it looks to me like we're losing influence over LCC too because of this power vacuum that I see being created.
So we have to walk and chew gum. We have to continue to engage with him and find common ground, continue to push him. I mean, he may not even have had these elections if he hadn't been pressured in part by us. And so we have to remain engaged. And as I said, I don't think we should cut $1 of assistance to Egypt, but I do believe that we need to use other levers at our disposal to continue both to signal to the regime that it needs to get better and to Egyptian civil society that all hope isn't lost.
Right. Thank you both. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. To the